It's Sunday. It is February 5th, 2023. We went down to surprise one of my aunts for her 91st birthday um, in a different state. So um, we drove down. Uh, it um, There were several things that happened. I don't even know where to preface it. Um, One of the most scary things on the trip, we went down, we had a great time with everybody. And then we stayed at a Best Western hotel. So we stayed overnight. It was my mother, my father, my son, and myself. And there was it was she was I mean my mother started screaming in the middle of the night. Now I don't even know how to speak on this subject as far as time, space, relativity, spiritual journey, like matrix mechanics at topology, um at like, is it theoretically possible to have your body in one state of existence but be coexisting somewhere else, perhaps through an umbilicus or a wormhole somewhere else, that you might be trapped spiritually, and yet the body where it lays in its everyday path is somehow through this neurologically networked umbilicus able to have the non-traumatized body, or the body that's being traumatized in a different way, scream out and like microphone through its body mechanics what's I mean to be sound asleep and have someone next to you start screaming for help. And um and then I listened to my father's reaction. And again, I'm quantifying this at such a deep level um, in the mechanics for which my astrology and numerology was built, and how the path has warped in time and space. Um, I heard somebody at church say that sin, is when your destiny is off, and the path that is, like, if you're on, like, let's just theoretically say in like layman's terms, if you're on a road and then somebody puts these big yellow orange cones in the way and forces you out of the lane and into a different lane, that would be sin, perhaps. I mean, that's the way that they described it, is something that out of your control, but you have to move over for. um So I'm just in this discussion really with myself in my quiet. I know that even when we're in New York, she is trapped somewhere else in time and space and she's screaming for help. Um, I'm sure somewhere in the world there's a study on paranormal and paradox and parallels. And how, I mean, they just came out with a movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, where they posed through the lens of another gender, um, this theoretical possibility. Um, so, and then having this experience with her in New York, but also in Maryland, or the state of Maryland, her being my mother. And it was it was so traumatizing in the fact of knowing that her body, I mean, like, it sounded like she was in such trauma. But then when the body wakes up, to not even know what or where that parallel dimension was from which she was experiencing something else. And again, I don't know, does that go into brainwave theory or like brainwave actuality within the dark matter field? um Again, I've built some words up to try to or center and orient myself in the actuality of what she's experiencing. So it was it was a rough sleep, um, because it was the up and the downs. Now, on a lighter note, we were invited for dinner over one of my relatives' houses, and it was it was like being at like a professional chef. I mean, she just went out of her way to cook this amazing meal for which we were really grateful and touched that she put so much time and effort into these culinary experiences that are out of the ordinary for us. Um, and then her husband happens to be a professional musician, so he put on a private concert, which, again, to sit there in the presence of greatness, to experience live music from somebody who's studied it, somebody who knows their craft. Um, it was just, it was such a blessing. Um, my son got to experience a live cellist, like, and in a private concert, no less. It was just the family on the couch, and it was he in the chair, and he let us enter his world for two pieces, and it was just, and then afterward, I was in such awe, and then afterwards, and I didn't want to take the video camera out while he was in the middle of his piece because I didn't know if he wanted to be videotaped, and I didn't want to be disruptive. But then afterwards, I wish that I had so I could reflect back on it. Um, but it was just so nice. And of course, my son, he loves classical music. So, as do I. And to watch his reaction. And then they also, prior to that, they had a dance competition with this new wave music, for which I'm not a big fan, but it's whatever it is. And they have like these dance moves, and so my father got up, and um, the two, well, my son preteen and the teenager that was in the house there, and they were dancing. They were having a good time. It was nice to watch them. Um, it was something called Just Dance. Um, which has changed. It has a very different visual, and the sound of the music is very different than when it came out with the Kinects. This one was with, I think, the Nintendo Switch, and there was a real difference in the gaming, like, transition from when it first came out with the Kinects and to whatever they had. So anyhow, so they did their piece, and then they shut that down, and then we actually got to sit, and it was such a memorable experience being together. I mean, they really went out of their way, which was so touching and so wonderful. um and so and we celebrated pretty much January because there's a few birthdays in January. And so it was, that part was so nice. It was so peaceful. It was not traumatic. It was, we felt welcomed, and and this is a family that in my youth and my childhood was also very kind to me as well. Um, and they're the side of the family that I traveled with. Um, so they have a very special place in my heart. Um, they're the family I spent the most time with in my youth. Um, and then we went back to the hotel, which is called Best Western, and um, we all went to sleep peacefully. The room was peaceful. I was laughing that the floor above us, it sounded like there were like wild elephants. In the morning, um, when we were leaving, I noticed there was a bunch of teenagers that were there from some, I think they were there for some sports thing, it looked like. Um, so again, we um, just quiet observations. But again, it was a peaceful entrance into slumber. So for her to have such a traumatic event, it was really very disruptive. Here in New York, there's a wall between us when she goes into these episodes, which she has quite often. Again, I don't know paranormal sleep. I don't really know what kinds of studies these are. But to listen to my father's like, he got up the next morning, or got up this morning, and he was like, first thing out of his mouth, I was listening to the way that his machine inside the Matrix responded to his wife being in trauma. Um, and this is just my quiet field note of what I actually went through mentally in observing this from like a POV inside of a larger system, like systems in systems kind of a thing, for diagnostics. And so I'm watching his reaction, and he's using language that he doesn't normally use, which I found fascinating. He's like, I really think this is past life trauma, and you need some form of therapy in order to, he's like, past life trauma and then regressive therapy. And I'm thinking of the words that he used, and in the order for which he used them. And then I'm thinking about what I'm aware of in my quietness. I always say that the three of us live on different planets. Um, I mean, it's three different zodiac houses, and then there's other layers in there in topology. So, um, he said regressive, and I'm like, past lives. I'm like, you mean the past? Like, the past as it progresses? And I'm like, I mean, I'm thinking of the conjecture a little differently as he's explaining it. And of course, I have the here and now, and I have the symmetry of the future. And in topological terms, that's incredibly significant piece um, when creating theory, theology, and postulate. So, and then um, a whole nother side piece to that was when we first arrived, um, because we left at 5 a.m. And then we were down there around like 9ish. Um, and we surprised my aunts, and then we had breakfast. The conversation with a 91-year-old female for whom I really appreciate um, her way of being. I always have. Um, she has qualities that she experienced um, in her life, that opportunities, blessings that were um, that helped her throughout her journey here. Um, and then things that I noticed in my journey, I was not offered. And so I'm deficient in some of these qualities, which make it increasingly difficult to maintain certain things. Um, so I was listening, I was saying to her something, and then she came back with some standardized viewpoint. They do a lot of reading, mostly reading. Um, and probably one of the most educated people um, that I don't get to spend a lot of time with, but one of the most educated people I know. And her viewpoint on I mentioned something, um, and then her take or her automatic response to my saying, my level of concern about one certain event that was happening in New York City, with the frequency of the bus let-offs in New York City and the amount of accumulation, which was concerning, because it wasn't like it was just one bus of asylum seekers for which could be absorbed into a city in a capacity and like a whatever ratio, but it was this buses upon buses upon buses and hotels worth of people, and so she comes back with a stock answer for which concerned me greatly, and I'm like, right. And then I said to her, I sidestepped the conversation, um and I said to her, because again, it's not a Sith like level conversation of like an absolute. But I know that she makes it that way, but that's not the way I intended it, and I have other concerns in a multiple layered situation. So, um, then she says to me, then I said to her that the other thing that greatly concerns me is the amount of, um, because in New York they have on, and I noticed in Maryland, they had on the television this, well, definitely New York, they had this, um, where they do this charcoal burn thing to pedestrians in these big diesel trucks, that they put some kind of fuel in there, that black smoke comes out the back, and they almost fumigate pedestrians. So I mentioned something about that I've been running and along the highway, and I notice that sometimes the fuel, I don't know where these cars are fueling up. I mean, again, there's bridges involved, there's local fuel stations. I I'm not sure where they're fueling up, or if they're having these fuel efficiency additives that they put in the gas tank and then drive. But I noticed different scents, and then I also noticed some of my neuromuscular function being altered out of nowhere. And again, not knowing exactly where the the findings are of the study of things. So I mentioned that to her. That was also very concerning, with like not knowing who regulates it, who's in charge of the testing of these chemicals, like who and what's involved. And just this feeling of like not knowing and being in a possible like dangerous situation, my health, and then also trying to negotiate out through this health system that nobody seems to have answers, where like it feels like you're getting spun around. And I kind of listened to her, and she actually did not have anything to say back to me on that one. um because again, like, I noticed the taxi and medallion audience, or I mean, if they're operatives in some kind of field analysis, the taxi medallion crowd, at least what they put on in New York City as their representatives, and then what is at gas stations with these fueling stations, there seems to be a flow of money going through this one crowd, which again, um, I don't want to get into like the nitty gritty of it, but it's concerning. Um, and then that cycle and flow of money and how that's being handled, um, along with dwindling and deteriorating population of people that look family familiar. Um, it's just all like calculus for me at this point. Um, so as we were driving down, I know we stopped in New Jersey. I took a footnote for myself. They actually, the Honorable Governor Murphy, who's on the television in New York, was actually on the wall on the service station. So that was good, because at least I had confirmation that that's honest reporting, without knowing anything differently. Um, but truth in reporting there seems to be working. On the way back, we stopped in Maryland. It did not have the same situation going on. I didn't see if I didn't see the, and I forget the name of the rest station. I took a photo so that it should be marked there, but I don't have access to it on the front of my um, whatever. Just for comparison. Um, so there's that. Just between the different states, one was a turnpike, one, I don't know if it's called a freeway and interstate. I don't know what the difference is. Um, but I did notice when staying overnight, when I turned the news on to make sure, just get an update, first thing this morning while everybody else is getting ready, they had a direct TV and a remote. So I used the remote function in order to access the news. I tried locating the thing that I use in New York called CBS. I could not find it easily on the first set of data points that I use from my time in New York. Um, there's some kind of disruption there. They don't use the channel 2 as the CBS. I don't know what that was about. Then later on, Lewis took the remote and he was able to find Jane Pauley, but that was at a later time segment earlier in the morning, because like in New York it goes local news into CBS Sunday mornings. In Maryland, it was not set up the same. I had to go to some alternate local news station, but nothing with that like national brand. I mean, they did have Channel 7, ABC. I did find that. Um, So I tried to stay on that channel to know that it was a legitimate news source that I have also access to in New York. Um, so that brought me a little bit of comfort. But it was concerning that I couldn't find CBS, since that's the standard in New York, and I don't know what's going on with broadcasting. And I mean, again, these are things that aren't even brought up in conversation. I wouldn't even know where they hold these levels of conversations. Um, but it was an observation that I made while on this road trip, to visit family. So, it's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza, it's Earth, solar system, Milky Way universe, galaxies broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.